I thought I came to the bank just to put a final period on the past, but 10 minutes later, I was told that I owned millions I didn't even know existed. When the bank employee turned the computer screen toward me, I initially thought he had made a mistake. I stared at the numbers, waiting for them to disappear. But they didn't. $19,842,611. $19,842,611. I was just an ordinary woman, a woman who bought groceries on sale, a woman who had driven the same car for years, a woman who had never held more than a few $1,000s at one time. And suddenly I was told that the account I was about to close held millions, my late husband's money, money I knew absolutely nothing about. And the most terrifying part, someone else knew. Good day, dear listeners. Diana is back with you. I am so glad you are with me again. If you enjoy stories about life, secrets, betrayals, and unexpected twists of fate, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Also, let me know in the comments which city you are listening from. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Today, I am going to tell you the story of Emily Harper. The story of a woman who thought she had lost her husband, only to discover, a year after his death, that he had left behind a secret worth nearly $20 million. And that secret almost destroyed her life. My name is Emily Harper. I was 56 years old when all of this happened. I lived in a small house in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where neighbors knew each other by name, where people stepped out in their bathrobes in the morning to grab the newspaper, where everyone decorated their houses with identical fairy lights for Christmas. I was never a woman who looked for adventure. I liked stability. I liked predictability. I worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic for 24 years. My life was simple. Work, home, family, occasional trips, Friday night dinners, and the little joys that most people don't even notice. I drove an old 2014 Subaru Outback. Every Sunday morning, I went to the exact same grocery store. I knew the cashier. She knew what kind of candy my grandson liked. That was my life. Peaceful, ordinary, and I was absolutely certain I knew everything about my husband. His name was Robert Harper. We were married for 29 years. We met when I was 27. Back then, he worked as a structural engineer. He was a quiet man, not the most talkative, but reliable. At least, that's what I thought. Robert was a man who always said, "The main thing is to provide for the family and leave something good behind." And I believed him. We weren't rich. We didn't have big mansions. We didn't fly first class. We didn't buy expensive clothes. We were standard American middle class, a house we spent 18 years paying off. Retirement accounts. Small savings. Everything was perfectly normal, until one morning, Robert died. He was 61. It happened out of nowhere. He just collapsed near the garage as he was getting ready to leave for work. A heart attack. No warning. No final conversation. No chance to say goodbye. Over 29 years of marriage, I had grown used to his presence. To his footsteps on the stairs. To the way he left his keys on the kitchen table. To the way he always asked, "Did you lock the door?" After his death, the house became too quiet. At first, I thought I would get used to it. But grief works in strange ways. It comes in waves. Sometimes you live normally the whole day, and then you find an old shirt in the closet, and suddenly it feels like you lost him just yesterday. A year after Robert's death, I decided to settle all the remaining financial matters. I had already closed his credit cards, sorted out the retirement account, filed the paperwork. Only one account was left. Our joint savings account. I almost never used it. We had opened it many years ago when planning a trip to Europe. But the trip never happened. After Robert's death, I saw the statements a few times. There was about $1,000 in there. Nothing special. I decided, it's time to close this final connection. That is why on a Tuesday morning, I walked into the bank branch on Worthington Road. I remember that day, down to the smallest detail. There was a light rain outside. I was wearing a gray coat. I held a folder with documents in my hands. I approached the counter. A young girl named Madison was serving me. She smiled and said, "Good morning. How can I help you?" I replied. I want to close my husband's joint account. He passed away a year ago. She calmly entered the information into the computer. At first, everything was routine. She checked my documents, asked for my ID, then she entered the account number. And that was when the moment I will never forget happened. Her face changed. Just a little bit at first. She stopped smiling. Then she frowned. She looked at the screen. Then at me. Then back at the screen. Ma'am, she said quietly. I immediately felt a wave of anxiety. What's wrong? She didn't answer. She just said, please wait a moment. She stood up and walked away. I watched her go. Ordinary thoughts raced through my head. Maybe there was an issue with the paperwork. Maybe they needed the death certificate. Maybe a system error. But 2 minutes later, she returned. And a man walked in with her. He was around 60 years old. In a suit. With a serious expression on his face. Mrs. Harper? Yes. I'm Michael Richardson, the branch manager. Would you mind stepping into my office? I felt a cold chill inside. When a bank manager personally invites you to talk, it is never a casual matter. I sat across from him. He closed the door, placed a folder in front of him, and just stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he asked, Mrs. Harper, do you know the current balance of this account? I was slightly surprised. Of course, there is about $1,000. He looked at me very intently. No, I frowned. Excuse me? He turned the monitor toward me. And that's when I saw those digits. $19,842,611. My hands began to shake. That's impossible. I said it out loud. I think there's been a mistake, but Michael Richardson shook his head. There is no mistake. I stared at the screen. Millions of dollars. In an account that bore my name. And the name of my deceased husband. I don't understand, the man said gently. Mrs. Harper, were you the only owner with access to this account? Yes. And you never knew about sums like this? I slowly shook my head. Never. He opened the folder. Then we need to talk, because the history of this money didn't start yesterday. It began several years ago. And it involves your husband's activities. I walked out of the bank nearly an hour later, but I was already a different person. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking. $19 million. How? From where? Why did Robert never tell me anything? I arrived home, put my bag on the kitchen table, looked around. Everything was exactly the same. His armchair, his books, his photographs, and suddenly, for the first time in 29 years of marriage, I felt a strange sensation. As if I had lived next to a man whom I didn't fully know. That night, for the first time in many months, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Beside me was the empty space where my husband had slept for nearly 30 years. Before, when I felt anxious, I could always turn to Robert and say, I'm scared. And he would reply, everything will be fine. But now, the person I trusted most in the world was gone. And for the first time, I realized one thing. Sometimes the hardest part of losing someone is not that they are gone. It's that the answers to the questions you never got to ask leave with them. I got up around 3 a.m, made some coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out an old metal box filled with papers. I used to call it the life box. Our important documents were in there: marriage certificate, house deeds, insurance policies, tax returns. Everything people keep because they think, someday we might need this. I began going through the papers. At first, there was nothing unusual. Ordinary bills. Ordinary documents. But then I noticed something. At the very bottom lay a folder I had never seen before. It was dark blue. Unmarked. Unlabeled. For some reason, my heart began to beat faster. I opened it. Inside were copies of agreements, contracts, spreadsheets, and several documents in the name of a company I had never heard of. Harper Strategic Investments, LLC. I frowned. Robert's company. Why did I never know about it? He always said he worked as a regular engineer. Yes, he occasionally consulted for construction firms. Yes, he had side projects. But a company? Investives? I kept flipping through the pages, and I found a document that made me freeze. It was an asset management agreement, dated 7 years ago. Investment amount, $3 million. I just stared at the page for a few minutes. $3 million. I lived with a man who invested $3 million, and I knew nothing about it. In the morning, I did something I had never done before. I started investigating my husband, not out of anger, not out of a desire to blame him, but because I needed to understand the truth. I opened my laptop, found Robert's old emails. We never hid passwords from each other. At least, that's what I thought. His main account was clean. Work emails, bills, standard messages. But then I noticed a folder he rarely used. Archive. I opened it. There were hundreds of emails. Most were ordinary, but a few were from a man named Victor Lang. I knew that name. Victor Lang, Robert's best friend from his youth. They went to university together. He was even the best man at our wedding. But for the last 10 years, Robert barely mentioned him. Whenever I asked, "How is Victor doing?" he would always reply, "We don't talk anymore." I never asked why. Now, I regretted it. I opened the first email. It was from 5 years ago. The text was brief. "Robert, we need to sort out the last transfer. The money can't be kept there for too long. If problems arise, she must not know anything. She, not a name, not your wife. Just, she." I felt an unpleasant chill. I opened the next email. And the next. With each message, the picture became clearer. Victor and Robert were working together. But not on regular investments. They were building a complex financial structure through several shell companies. I didn't understand all the technical details. But one thing became obvious. Robert was leading a double life. That same day, I called a lawyer, but not the one who helped me after my husband's passing. I chose a new one. I needed someone who would represent me. Not Robert, not our family. Me. Her name was Olivia Bennett. She was around 45 years old. She specialized in financial investigations and inheritance disputes. When I walked into her office, I felt foolish. It felt like I was telling some far-fetched fiction story. I said, "My husband died a year ago. I went to close an account, and I found out there's almost $20 million in it." She didn't interrupt me. She just listened. I handed over the documents. An hour later, she said, "Mrs. Harper, I have one question for you." "What is it? Are you certain your husband died of natural causes?" I froze. "What do you mean?" She calmly replied, "I am not making accusations, but when people start hiding large sums of money, people who have a lot to lose often appear nearby." I remembered the day Robert died. His garage, his car, his phone, his sudden death. "Do you think he could have been killed?" Olivia shook her head. "I think we shouldn't draw conclusions without proof, but we need to find out who was near your husband during the final months of his life." A week later, Olivia hired a financial expert. His name was David Miller. He used to work in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. His task was simple: understand where the $19 million came from. The first results arrived 2 weeks later, and they changed everything. David asked me to come to Olivia's office. When I entered, they were both sitting at the table. A thick file lay before them. Olivia looked at me. "Emily, before we begin, I want to say one thing." "What?" "What you are about to find out will be painful." I sat down. "I'm ready." David opened the file. "Your husband did indeed work as an engineer." I nodded, but that was only a fraction of his life. He showed me the documents. About 10 years ago, Robert began cooperating with a group of private investors. "What kind of investors?" He looked at me. "People involved in real estate." "And is that illegal?" David paused. "Not all of it, but..." He turned the page. "But part of the money in your account is linked to a fraudulent scheme." I felt my mouth go dry. "Was Robert a criminal?" Olivia answered carefully. "We don't know the whole picture yet. But there is a problem." She placed a printout in front of me. It was a list of transfers. The very last transfer. 3 weeks before Robert's death. Amount: $2,400,000. Recipient: Lang Financial Group. Victor Lang. My husband had transferred $2.4 million to him just before he died. And 3 weeks later, he was gone. I drove home feeling more than just pain for the first time. I felt rage, not because of the money, but because my husband had allowed me to live in complete ignorance. I thought about our conversations, our dinners, our retirement plans. I remembered asking him once, "Robert, are we doing okay financially?" He smiled and answered, "Of course, Emily. We have nothing to worry about." Now I understood. He was telling the truth. I had nothing to worry about, because he had already decided everything himself. Without me. The next day, something happened that I didn't expect. I came home after work, and I saw a car parked near my house. A black SUV. I had never seen it before. I stopped in the driveway. A few seconds later, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, around 60 years old. Gray hair, an expensive suit. He looked straight at me, and I instantly realized who it was. Victor Lang, the man whose name I kept seeing in the documents. He smiled, but the smile was ice cold. "Emily Harper?" I didn't answer. "My name is Victor." He took a step forward. "I think we need to talk about Robert." I felt my heart begin to race. "If you have something to say, speak through my lawyer." His smile vanished. "Your lawyer?" He chuckled softly. "Robert always said you were an overly cautious woman." I froze. "What do you want?" He looked at the house, then back at me. "I want to help you avoid a massive mistake." "What mistake?" He paused. "Don't go digging where you don't need to." I felt a chill run through me. "Is that a threat?" "No, Emily." He tilted his head. "It's advice." He got back into his car, but right before driving off, he said, "Sometimes it's better to leave the past buried along with the person." And then he drove away. I stood by the house alone. But now, I knew one thing for certain. $19 million wasn't just money. It was the reason someone was terrified of me discovering the truth. After the encounter with Victor Lang, I could no longer pretend this was just a financial dispute. This was no longer a story about money. This was a story about the truth. About a man I had trusted for nearly 3 decades, and about how much can hide behind an ordinary life. That night, I sat in the kitchen again. Robert's photo lay on the table. A picture from our anniversary. He was 45. I was 40. We were smiling, and at that moment, I genuinely believed I knew the person next to me. I picked up the photo and whispered into the quiet room, "Why didn't you tell me anything?" Of course, there was no answer. But for the first time since his death, I allowed myself to admit what I had been afraid to face before. I wasn't just a woman who had lost her husband. I was a woman who had been betrayed. The next day, I called Olivia. He came to my house. The other end of the line went silent. "Who?" "Victor Lang." She immediately turned serious. "What exactly did he say?" I told her everything. Every word. Every phrase. When I finished, she said, "Emily, everything changes now." "Why?" "Because before, we were investigating your husband's past actions. Now we have proof that someone is actively trying to intimidate you in the present." She instructed me not to speak to anyone else without her. Not to answer unknown numbers. Not to meet with anyone associated with Robert. And most importantly, do not touch the money. A few days later, David Miller brought fresh results. This time, he looked even graver. He laid out several documents in front of us. I found the source of most of the money. I looked at him, and... He paused. "Robert didn't steal all this money." I felt an unexpected wave of relief, but it lasted only a second. "But he assisted the people who did," David explained. Several construction companies across different states were creating fictitious contracts. They inflated project costs. The difference between the actual cost and the documented figure was funneled through a network of shell companies. One of those companies belonged to Victor Lang. Robert acted as a financial consultant. He helped draft the paperwork. He moved funds. He created the illusion of legitimate business activity. But 7 years ago, Robert began to realize what was truly happening. He wanted out of the scheme, and that was when Victor started putting pressure on him. "There's something else," David said. I looked at him. "What?" He opened the final page. Before his death, Robert was gathering evidence. I frowned. Evidence? Yes. He wasn't just storing money. He was trying to compile a copy of all the documents that could destroy Victor Lang and the other participants. I stared at the folder. "Where are these documents?" David and Olivia exchanged a look. And then Olivia said, "We found them." It turned out that 2 weeks before his death, Robert had rented a safe deposit box, not in his name. He used a trusted notary. Inside the box were copies of contracts, correspondence, financial statements, audio recordings of conversations, and a letter. A letter written in my husband's handwriting. Olivia handed it to me. I didn't open it for a long time. I was terrified, because I knew, after reading these pages, I would never be able to think of Robert the same way again. I began to read. "Emily, if you are reading this letter, it means I failed to fix what I broke. I know you will be angry. And you have every right to be. I hid a part of my life from you. I told myself I was protecting you, but the truth is, I was protecting myself. I was ashamed to admit that I had gotten tangled up in something I couldn't easily escape. When I first started working with Victor, I thought it was just standard financial consulting. I was wrong. By the time I understood what was going on, it was too late. I tried to walk away, but people like Victor don't just let you walk away. I transferred the money to our account not because I wanted to hide it. I wanted you to have a chance. I wanted to leave you the evidence. I wanted you to be safe. I am so sorry I made you a part of this story without your consent. You deserve to know the truth. Forgive me, Robert." I finished reading the letter, and I sat in silence for a long time. I had expected anger, hatred, but I felt only exhaustion, because sometimes the truth doesn't bring relief. Sometimes the truth just becomes another heavy weight you have to learn to carry. A week later, Olivia turned all the documents over to federal investigators. An official investigation began, and Victor Lang realized the tides had turned. He tried to contact me one last time. But now, I was ready. He called in the evening. I turned on the call recorder. "Emily, we need to talk. All questions go through my lawyer." He sighed. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into." "No, Victor." For the first time, I spoke his name calmly. "You are the one who doesn't understand." A pause followed. Robert was a weak man. I felt something tighten inside me, perhaps. I looked at my husband's photograph, but at least at the end he tried to fix his mistakes. Victor sneered. "And you think that will save you?" I replied. "No. What saves me is that I am no longer afraid." And I hung up. The following months were brutal. There were interrogations, meetings with lawyers, paperwork, endless explanations. I had to tell the story of my marriage over and over again to people looking for evidence. But every single time, I said the exact same thing. I didn't know. I didn't participate. I was simply the wife of a man who made terrible mistakes and tried to fix them when it was already too late. 8 months later, Victor Lang was arrested. He was charged with fraud, money laundering, and financial conspiracy. Several other participants in the scheme were also brought to justice. When I saw his mugshot on the news, I didn't feel joy. Only a strange sense of closure, because justice isn't about revenge. It's the moment when the truth finally overpowers the lie. A year after that fateful day at the bank, I was sitting in Olivia's office once again. She placed the paperwork in front of me. "Everything is finalized." I looked at her. "What does that mean?" "The court has cleared you as someone who had no part in the crimes. The money that rightfully belongs to you remains yours." I asked, "How much?" She smiled. "After all the legal procedures, taxes, and the restitution of illicit funds, you are left with about $12 million. I looked out the window. Once upon a time, I dreamed of just having enough money to live peacefully. But now I understood. Money doesn't buy back time. It doesn't restore trust. It doesn't change the past. I didn't buy a massive mansion. I didn't flip my life upside down in a single day. I did everything slowly. I sold the old house. Not because I hated it, but because it was filled with memories that no longer allowed me to move forward. I bought a small house by a lake, with a large window in the kitchen, and a garden I planted myself. I quit my job. After 24 years, I woke up in the morning for the first time without having to rush anywhere. But I didn't want to just sit at home. I started an initiative to help women who face financial hardships after the passing of their spouses. Because I realized one critical thing: many people trust their loved ones completely. And that is beautiful. But knowing the reality of your own life is equally important. My son, Daniel, was furious with his father at first. Deeply angry. He said, "Mom, how could he keep this from you?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe fear, maybe pride, maybe the desire to appear stronger than he actually was. But over time, we both came to understand. Robert was a flawed man, not a hero, not a villain, just a human being. And sometimes, the people we love can love us completely, while still causing us immense pain. Now, as I tell this story, 3 years have passed. I no longer wake up asking, why did he do it? Because some questions never receive a full answer. I learned to live on. I traveled. I went to Italy for the first time in my life. I learned to paint. I made new friends. I became the woman I used to be afraid to even imagine. Not a rich woman. Not a woman defined by millions, but a woman who finally knows her own worth. If you were to ask me, Emily, do you wish you had never had $19 million? I would say, no, because along with that dark secret, I gained something far more vital. I gained the truth, and the truth, no matter how agonizing, gives you the chance to start anew. I lost a husband. I lost the illusion of a perfect marriage. I lost a piece of my past, but I found myself, and sometimes that is the greatest inheritance a person can ever receive. And now, I want to ask you, if you found yourself in my shoes, would you keep the money? Would you try to unearth the whole truth about the person you loved? Or would you prefer to leave the past closed? Share your thoughts in the comments. I am truly curious to know what you would do. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. Take care of yourselves. And remember, sometimes the greatest mystery in our lives unravels not to destroy us, but to finally set us free.